wealth is not just about money. It's time, it's our sense of safety, it's rest, it's clarity, it's capacity. And it also is our ability to be able to live a life that feels like ours on our own terms. So liberatory finance is about cutting through the myth that finance is just about money, is just about financial wealth or like financial capital. And then also it's about bringing in more of the economics piece.
And welcome to Delusional. I'm your host, Michelle, and I am so excited to be here with my friend Bunny McKensie Mack. Bunny, please introduce yourself.
My name is Bunny McKensie Mack, and I went from eviction notice on my door to a 7-figure business in less than 2 years.
That's such a cool, inspiring story, and I'm so excited to get all the way into it. So let's start from the beginning. Do you want to kind of tell us what led up to the eviction notice and then what happened? Because most people, when they were in that situation, would be way too stressed out to like build anything from there.
Yeah, for sure. I think in a nutshell, what I would say is what led up to the eviction notice is wealth inequality in our country. It's probably definitely what led up to the eviction notice. And the fact that there was a researcher at MIT, economist by the name of Peter Timmon, and y'all are going to hear me talk about economics a lot. I like to call myself an economist from the future because I'm currently a double major studying economics and finance. But this economist, Peter, found that for people who were actually born in poverty, it would take at least 20 years without hardly anything going wrong for them to reach another class, like a higher class. So like going from poverty maybe to being lower middle class, and then from being lower middle class to maybe being like, entering into whatever is above lower middle class in like the ways in which we describe economics and income in the United States, because, now it's becoming a lot less nuanced. But for me, that was my story, where one of the first times that I read that, I really thought about it. I was like, wow, without hardly anything going wrong. And I'm like, that basically has been the first 20 years of my life. Well, at least at that time, the first 20 years of my life. And for me, I grew up in a blue collar family on the south side of Chicago. My dad is a firefighter. He wasn't at the time, but then he became a firefighter, but he was a coach. He worked at like local schools in the city. And my mom is a nurse, and my grandmother was a factory worker who actually at that time was one of the very, very few homeowners in our entire family. She bought her house in 1974. And coming into like being in a really tough spot financially was I was traveling abroad. I was like getting a master's in cultural anthropology. I was traveling throughout South Africa, and my grandmother passed. And when I had come back home, I experienced like a really deep depression and like just was really, really, really in grief. This is the first time someone that close to me had passed away. And I had, of course you like watch TVs and movies and you're like, okay, yeah, like you're sad somebody passes away, but then you're like, oh wait, no, when you actually experience it, there's like nothing in like pop culture or like arts and entertainment that can really capture what that's like. So I went into a deep depression. And at that time too, there was a lot going on with our economy. So just working period was tough, and like finding work was really tough. And so for me, I was doing a lot of like learning and development, like strategy, consulting work. And I think just one day, after kind of like allowing myself the space to really be in a very depressed place, I was just kind of like, okay, now what do I want for my life? What do I want for my community? And around that time, and thinking about what I wanted for my community, I knew that I had to find some sort of a purpose beyond my pain and grief. And my purpose at that time was I want to take all this work that I'm doing or have done with progressive organizations. I want to build better systems that don't currently exist. And then I want to work with people who share similar politics and values as me. But then I also want to create a workplace where other people can come into that workplace and be brave and not be treated poorly on the basis of other people's fear, of their identities, or like fear based on phobias of folks' identities. And that is what enabled me to kind of really, I think, pull myself out of the space that I was in, was being able to find a purpose like that.
And I love that. And, we talk to plenty of entrepreneurs who have done very well financially on the show. And a lot of folks come from a motivation of, I want to have a lot of freedom in my lifestyle, or I want to, support my family, which is like nothing wrong with that. Like that's perfectly cool. And I love it when I talk to somebody who has a broader motivation I want to help the community. I see some, systemic stuff that's going on in the world. And I know that if I do better financially, that I'm going to be in a better position to actually force a change or help, do something. And I love that you're there, because I feel like so many people that are in that work and in that line of thought, they're not looking at money. And almost,
Yeah.
especially coming from the progressive side on the left, money can sometimes be demonized. And
Right.
I've definitely talked to folks who said, I want to help my community, but I feel like I'm betraying them if I go and get rich, or, there's a lot to unpack there. So I'll just stop. What do you think about that whole concept of I'm betraying my community if I break out and make a lot of money?
Oh my gosh, I really appreciate you saying that because I think that survivor's guilt is real.
Hmm.
And I experienced at the beginning of my business, which is why I paid other folks that I was working with very, very well, and then paid myself. I was paying myself so low at the time, my CPA was like, what are you doing? But when I look back, I think, oh, this was like super survivor's guilt,
Hmm.
where I felt like in order for me to be successful, everything has to be about everyone else, but nothing can be about me. And,
Mm.
I think sometimes it's very easy to speak to a value or a politic, and it's way harder, as we know, to live it, especially when you include yourself in the equation. And that was tough for me to really identify like, no, if you say that you care deeply about social justice and you care deeply about anti oppression, that is not true unless you're included. And
Hmm.
if you're not included, then there's additional work to be done on like you being able to say, this is something that I truly believe because you're a human being on earth who is connected to all other human beings on earth. And so you also have to be able to experience some sort of equitable outcome. And then I'll say, like, we know we live in a capitalist society. So the idea that without money and without moving resources to those who are most marginalized and who have the least resources, that we could skip over that step and that we could somehow still achieve an equitable outcome. That wouldn't be possible unless our economic model changed. But in the current economic model that we have, which is a mix of capitalism, a mix of socialism, um, it just would not be possible for us to kind of skip over what's really important for us to really discuss and to focus on, which is like how wealth is distributed in our society and then also how wealth is redistributed in our society. So for me, it's not a zero sum game. And I don't like false binaries. I mean, especially as a non-binary person, I don't like false binaries. So I can't go the route of like, if you make money, you were evil or you were bad. I think it's more of a, hey, if you're somebody who really cares about community and you have the ability to be able to generate resource, or to have resource be distributed to you, and then you have the power to redistribute them to others who are not in your position, then you should do it.
Absolutely. There's so many high level concepts that I want to get into with you on this show. I don't want to skip the part about how did you make your money in the first place, because I know everybody watching and listening is curious about that. So tell us about the business that broke out. What were you doing? How did you start getting paid lots of money really fast? Because you did this really quickly. Like you
Yeah, I
went from
did.
eviction notice to seven
Like,
figures in less than 2 years, right?
yeah, that's right. My first year I did 750,000.
Yeah.
And then it continued to grow and grow and grow from there. And, I would say this that I've always been a tinkerer. I'm a systems thinker,
Yeah.
which is why, like, and an Aries. I don't know if you all like the zodiac, but I do.
Aries. Me too. Me too.
And, like, especially as a queer person, it's kind of like you're just grandfathered into it. You just got to your rising sign, you have to know your sun sign, your moon sign. So, as an Aries sun, I'll say that for me, growing up in my family, I have a really big family. I have 7 brothers. But in my family growing up, my mom would buy new things because both my mom and my dad really, really liked technology, which I think helped me a lot and really gave me an edge coming into this, very technological society we live in now. But they would basically buy new gadgets and then they would hand it to me and they would say, learn how this works and then basically teach everybody else.
Mm.
And so anytime that they did that, also, which is very much like in Aries, I literally would just throw away the instruction manual and I would learn how to do it on my own. So I would just be, trying things and unplugging things and plugging things back in and then learning how things didn't work and then how things did work. And that's how I would say applies to the ways in which I think about human behavior. So with the experiences that I had prior to starting MMG EARTH, which is a research and change management firm based on the south side of Chicago, um, I really was like, I've been thinking a lot about working within organizations because before that, I had been like a full time worker for some time. And for me, a major frustration at times of working within progressive organizations was working within an organization that could look out externally at society and say, this isn't effective. We should do this better. Here's how we potentially fix this. But then when it came to their own organizations, it was like, no, this is the way that we've always done it. So let's just keep it the same. And that was always a frustration for me because I thought, but wait, if we know that something isn't effective, can't we change it? Like, can we, know that we're worthy enough, that we're inherently worthy of also being able to work within structures that work for us too, that don't just work for other folks that are outside the organization, which I think, again, ties really well into what I said before about working within advocacy organizations, and knowing how to support others, but then not knowing how to support ourselves. So very early on, I was doing some consulting on the side with a consulting firm in Chicago. And I remember coming to one of the founders and I said, I think that systems thinking and change management is the future of this consulting industry with progressive organizations. And they were like, I don't know. Let's just do training. Let's continue to do training. And I'm like, no, really. I really think that systems thinking and change management is going to be huge. And they were like, okay. And I don't think that they weren't dismissive, but I also didn't think they took me as seriously. And around that time, I had another experience with an organization. I think, again, it was just very much stuck on not evolving. And I was like, okay, I'm done. I'm going to focus on systems thinking. I had a mentor at the time, Desiree Attaway, who I knew was doing more work within progressive organizations and social justice organizations. And she was definitely a major inspiration for me. And then I was like, okay, it's time for me to go out on my own. I don't know exactly what the framing of this is going to look like, but I know that if I focus on the issues that I know that progressive leaders are experiencing, I can build solutions from there. But first, I need to communicate the fact that I understand, their point of view. I understand where they're coming from. Not here to be adversarial, not here to be a perfectionist, but I do want to be effective. And I know that I can meet leaders also who want to be effective and who want their organizations to operate more effectively too. So that's how my business came about.
I love it. And there's a timing component to this as well, which, one of the things, and I'll say I live in Washington, D.C. I know a lot of highly intelligent people. You are one of the smartest people that I know out of all the
Thank
thousands and
you.
thousands of people that I know. So you got that, you got that
Thank you
advantage
so
going for
much.
you, which is great. And you have a kind of a timing genius. I'm saying this as somebody who's watched your career and watched your ascent over the last decade or so. And you kind of hit on some very timely stuff at a very important time. Do you want to talk about that? And now you're doing it again, but let's talk about, about this time first.
Absolutely. So I think using research as a tool for understanding what's happening interpersonally within organizations. That was something that was really big in from end of 2018 going into 2019. I knew early on in my business, and this is before I really just started actually building a business, because before I was doing consulting work and strategy work, but I was basically just doing that according to I have time, I want to do it, but I wasn't really focused very seriously on building a business. But even at that time, I remember telling people, I know that I'm not going to be a DEI worker. And there were some folks in community who I knew were very, very offended by that, because they're like, what do you mean you're not going to be a DEI worker? And I'm like, I know that given the fact that this industry is predominantly historically marginalized people, number one, that's a real danger to the community, because then it kind of puts folks under this umbrella and it makes it very, very easy for people within this industry to be attacked and for people to kind of be damaged or to be harmed. And I also said, and secondly, I know that within any market, you have to differentiate yourself. So I know that I can't hold the title of DEI worker, because that includes such a vast, vast library of knowledge about identity and about labor and power. And I want to focus on the things that I want to focus on. I want to focus on research. I want to focus on operational efficiency, crisis management. And then I want to focus specifically on how organizations identify issues, or inefficiencies within their organization, and then how they correct those inefficiencies once they've identified them. And a lot of folks early on were like, no, this is not this is not going to be effective. And then when 2019 came, especially around the beginning of the pandemic, there were a lot of folks at home, and there were a lot of folks at home thinking and reflecting. And I think it just so happened that the timing was right, that I had timed appropriately, which is what equated to me having such a big year that year, and then later having even bigger years, kind of building off that momentum.
Well, and I want to ask you about that first client. And you don't have to name names if you don't want to,
Oh
but I
yeah.
know there are people listening who are right at the beginning of their entrepreneurial journey, or they're about to want to embark on one. And that's the big is like, how do you get that first big client? So you're going in with kind of a newer concept or a newer synthesis of concepts, and you're pitching larger organizations, and a lot of them would say, who have you worked for before? Or what have, show us case
Yes,
studies. And
so
so
true.
when you first went in with none of that really yet, how did you land that first big client?
That's a really good question. Like for me, early on, I learned that for me, it was important for me not to think about the money. And I don't say that in terms of, oh, money is not important. Of course, money is important and money matters. But I say that from a perspective of, in the beginning, it's important to think about capital as social capital. So it's social capital is what feeds our financial capital. And if I can build enough social capital, even if it's just one singular experience where I'm not being paid as much, I can multiply that. I used to always tell myself, if I can make $2,500 doing this, I can make 25,000. If I can make 25,000, I can make 250,000 in on and on and on and on and on until I don't want to make any more than that or whatever that dollar amount is, my goal is. So that is what I started with in the beginning is I intentionally went with smaller progressive organizations that I knew didn't have, like six-figure budgets to focus on operational development or like organizational development, but maybe they had $2,500 or they had $5,000 or $4,000. And then I built my reputation working with those organizations. I requested recommendations. And then what I started to do too is I started to build out in just a simple Google Doc. I started to build out my portfolio of I work with this organization from this date to this date. This is what they asked for. This is what we did. This is the outcome. And then I would always identify at the end of a project one primary contact who could act as a reference for me. And every time that I did that, I would up what my proposal was. So whatever the budget was that I did for the one prior, I would seek to increase it by at least $10,000 for the next organization until I reached my goal of for me, and what I was like, yeah, this is what this work is worth based on what I've modeled and what I know the market, is really hungry for.
And then I may have this wrong, but I seem to remember at one point you got like $1 million contract to do something, right? Is that right? Or am I making
Yeah,
that
that's
up?
right. Yeah. So my largest contract is 3 million.
Yeah.
And that for me was really, really exciting too, because I actually got that during, I think that was maybe in 2022
Mm-hmm.
when folks were like, okay, yeah, this is like the economy is not, the economy is not economying like we want it to.
Yeah.
But it was a really tough year in my business. So that was one of my years where I was like, okay, I don't know. I don't think I'm going to hit seven figures this year. And I had a colleague who sent me an RFP to do a government project. And I read the RFP and then I was like, no, I could really do this. So I took one weekend and in a day, I wrote the proposal, sent it off. Also was thinking, I don't know if we'll get an interview, especially I'm like at my intersections and with the tenor of like progressive politics that I hold around like racial justice and social justice and like reproductive justice and, queer and trans rights. I'm like, I don't know if that is too, quote unquote radical for like
Mm-hmm.
state government. So submitted that, got the interview, did the interview, or did a call, then did the interview, and then they let us know, yes, you've been awarded this $3 million contract to work with the state government. So that's the largest contract that I've ever done. But my goal in the future, my big goal is one day to do an eight figure. So I'm kind of like, how do I build on the seven figure experience to kind of build towards the eight figures and then see what happens from there?
I love it, and very inspiring to the folks listening and watching. So let's talk about what you're doing now. Do you want to tell us a little bit about ECON Club and how that came about?
Yes, I would love to because that's my baby. So Econ Club is the first finance club for the 99%. And within that, basically where you can find it is on Patreon. So on Patreon is where I offer folks very down to earth and practical, accessible education on liberatory finance. For folks that might be like, wait a minute, what is liberatory finance? What does that mean? Well, whenever we hear about finance, especially as entrepreneurs, oftentimes the education that we're receiving is focused on how do you make yourself rich or how do you make your family rich?
Mm-hmm.
And I know that within the United States, especially, we, are very keen on hyper individualism. So it's like, what's best for me?
Mm-hmm.
And a liberatory finance goes in a different direction where it's like, instead of how do you alone become rich or how do I alone become rich, is how do we become rich? It's how do we
Mhm.
build wealth that includes but also goes far beyond money. Because we know that wealth is not just about money. It's time, it's our sense of safety, it's rest, it's clarity, it's capacity. And it also is our ability to be able to live a life that feels like ours, on our own terms. So, liberatory finance is about cutting through the myth that finance is just about money, is just about financial wealth or like financial capital. And then also, it's about bringing in more of the economics piece. Because a lot of folks would be surprised that there are so many wealth managers in the world who are not required to study economics at a macro level.
Mhm.
So when they're giving advice based on, okay, this is what has worked historically, within very particular contexts, like for folks individually or for organizations or businesses. And for me, based on, again, like I said, I love, love, love studying how systems work. It was, how do I bring together both the finance education, but also the economics education too? So for example, during an economic recession, people are not receiving the same advice of like, just save your money or just spend less, but they actually are understanding like, hey, actually, this is what is happening with the economy currently. Based on what we know historically within this country, this is how long it typically takes for a recovery to happen. And this is what folks have done to be able to still be effective, especially as entrepreneurs that make up such a wide percentage of our country's GDP, so that they can still be successful in their own terms. So that's what Econ Club is. So there's a Patreon, and then via my Calendly, I also provide support to businesses that are focused on helping them to be as financially stable as possible, rooted in their own self-worth, and then aligned with, self-definition. So how they want to kind of live in this world and what it means for them to also, hopefully, which is the goal, to kind of build a life of ease in addition to being a successful entrepreneur.
I love it so much. And by the way, all of these things are going to be in the show notes. So you'll be able to check out everything Bunny's doing from the show notes on the YouTube of all of this. I think this is so timely. And, this has been, you and I have talked about this for years. This has been an interest of mine for a long time. I'm back in business school in, 2008, 2009. I was working on finance education stuff because for me, and I was looking at young people, I was like,
Yeah.
when I went to business school, and I mean, you and I obviously have different stories, but I did go from being, working class in Oklahoma to my mother listens to the show and she gets so upset when I talk about us living in the trailer. And I'm sorry, mom, because you know what? I got a side note for my mom. My mom is phenomenal. She did an amazing job. She was a single mom. She raised me on her own, and she, with
Incredible.
what little money she had, did a phenomenal
Yeah.
job with her money. Got to the point where by the time I was in college, she was able to buy a second property and rent it, and and she's retired, comfortably now. And I just, all the respect for my mom and all of the opportunities that she was able to give me on
Absolutely.
a teacher salary in Oklahoma as a single
Yeah.
mom. And the reality is I went from being, working class and had a class jump as well. Like we share that in our stories, you and me. When
Mm-hmm.
I got to business school and I went to Dartmouth, I was with these people that might as well have been aliens to me. I was just like, who are these people? And I would joke and say, I should have just pulled up a trailer on the lawn. That's how I felt with my tattoos. I was a single mom with a young child at the time. And I just felt like a totally foreign entity to these people who, like, I was like, what are the pink pants? What are the whales on their belt? Why are they jogging in pearls? It's like I was one of
Mm-hmm.
5 people in a class of 240 who had gone to a state school, a public undergrad. There were more people in my class from Dartmouth undergrad than from state schools.
Oh my gosh.
I was one of 4 mothers in my class.
Wow.
Right. And so I'm in this
Yeah.
situation and I'm going, okay, I'm learning so much. And obviously, I'm getting a world class finance education within that program. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting pissed, right? In terms of like, we don't teach this in school, and we could be teaching this to kids, at basic levels in elementary school, in junior high, in high school. Why do I have to get myself to Dartmouth to learn about finance and how the world works and how money works? This is nuts. And this is a big way that we gatekeep, whether that's intentional or not. We can dive all the way into that. I want to. Um, there are people who know this stuff and can use money to make money. And then there's everybody else who this is never taught. this is the rich dad, poor dad phenomenon. And yeah, you can go and self-educate. You can read that book and other books about this, but a lot of people don't even know where to start. They don't even know that this exists. This is like a whole foreign world to them. So I'll stop there and say, what do you think about all that?
I mean, I think that, well, first of all, I want to just shout out to also my family that I grew up visiting in the trailer parks in Southern Illinois. And my mom, who was also a single mom, who raised us and who did a phenomenal job on her singular salary as a nurse. But what I'll say is like, I'm so appreciative of you sharing that story as well, Michelle, about your mom, because it makes me think that those are like the best financial educators that we have are our moms. And because they show us, I think it's one thing for people to show you how to spend money when it feels almost as if the money they have access to is unlimited versus learning from people who are like, okay, like I have, a family to take care of. I also have to take care of myself. And, the funds that I have to do that are limited. And I think that there's so many really meaningful and critical lessons that moms very early on teach us about like, hey, this is how you work with what you have
Mm-hmm.
and how you do it with your head held high. And I kind of feel like if I had to choose between lessons, well, I'm always going to choose the mom lesson above all, because I do think that it teaches us even more so about how our economy works and finance works. What I would say too is like, I completely agree with you. I wish that there was more education like this that was not like, you know, sponsored by, fill in the name of the bank, but it's more so about the encouragement to spend and spend and spend. It's not so much telling us like, this is how your money is cycles through the economy. Like when you're working and you're somebody who says, oh, okay, well, I don't care what the government is doing with like what they're spending, whatever. And it's like, well, I'm not going to tell you should care. What I will tell you is, what I will say though, is like, you do know though that the reason why our government has money is because of income taxes and also like sales taxes. So that money is not just being printed, every year. That's literally coming out of your pocket. So just so you know, like you also get to say, hey, I'm going to be someone who's involved in this. My money is involved in it, but I don't need to know how it works. But it's important and critical that we understand that it's all connected. So we also don't get ideas about governance and like government that basically are just kind of put us in a position to accept the least when we should be demanding more than is being given to us. What I'll say too is like even myself during this podcast, I've named economics and I've named finance. So I think not assuming that folks are like, okay, get the clear distinction. So the way that I like to think about it is economics is what helps you understand the system. And it's what happens outside of your own personal choices. And then finance are the tools that help you to navigate the system. So it's what decisions are you making to be able to navigate what is happening at that bigger macro level. And for me, I think seeing so many folks not have access to that education, including me. I mean, for me, for the longest time, Michelle, I thought, oh my God, I'm bad at math because growing up elementary school, that's what my teacher told me is like, you're bad at math. And
Really?
then, yes, my teacher told me I was bad at math. And I was like, okay, I'm just like bad at math. And then when I
Mm.
went back to school, now like with a 4.0 GPA, like a straight A student, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not bad at math. It's really like about memorizing which equations to use for what thing. And
Mhm.
then basically doing knowing what order in which you're calculating things and specifically. But for me, that also was very empowering and liberating. That's what I want Econ Club to be. I want it to be something that teaches individual folks that have jobs, folks that are employed by someone else, and entrepreneurs how to integrate these tools of finance and economics meaningfully, but how to put them together so that they're not losing a really, really critical piece of the puzzle that I think is being left out by a lot of like the finance folks that we see, especially across social media.
Absolutely. And I mean, let's start with the basics, right? Because the finance education that a lot of folks get is very, save your, but make a budget, make sure
Yeah.
there's some extra, make sure you save
Mm-hmm.
it. And it's like nobody ever got rich by saving money. The people who get rich from nothing, they invest their money. And
Yeah.
it's like, how do we teach more people how to get a piece of that pie? Because especially right now, and oh, I want to dive all the way into what's happening right now with you. But especially right now, like in the year of our Lord 2025, we are seeing the only folks that are making any kind of money are the folks that are invested in the market, and they're
In the
invested
stock
in very
market.
specific things in the market. And
Mm-hmm.
everybody else is just eating shit right now
Yeah.
financially, right? And so it's like you either got in on that or you didn't, or you're trying to get in on it now. But a lot of people don't even know, and they're going, oh, I worked and I budgeted and I spent less than I made and I saved my money and I'm still struggling. And I don't know. I think that sucks. I wish more people knew how to invest. I wish that that basic knowledge were more accessible just about how the finance system works. I wish more people knew how to access capital to start businesses and all
Yeah,
of that.
absolutely. I mean, even if we take a few steps back, because I really appreciate you saying that, like, last year, 25% of the highest earners in the United States were responsible for 50% of all consumer spending. And so, like, when you think about that, that means that one out of every four people was spending as much as two out of every four people, while other folks were not doing that spending. And that's an example of how wealth inequality is working within our society right now, or is really not working for the majority, for the 99%. But it also is important to note because it's really bad for the economy to have such a small percentage of people responsible for so much spending. Because if 25% of those people wake up tomorrow and they're like, you know what, the economy is kind of scary, I'm going to stop spending, it literally stagnates our economy, and our economy stops because everything is connected to everything, all spending, all saving, right? All budgeting, all investing. So I think that there's something there too around, the investment piece and how that kind of pushes our economy forward. But there's also something there around people actually having access to make the money that they need to be able to have additional income that's not spent on, like, those bottom line bills where they actually have to be paid, that enables them to be able to invest their money. But I completely agree. I think that, as we know, there's a lot of inequality in terms of like who holds money within our society and who does not. And I think in addition to that, there's something about folks understanding what's called time value of money.
Mm-hmm.
Where I remember I was having this conversation with someone recently on Instagram, and they made a video and it was talking about ethical investing, or like, is investing in the stock market ethical? So I got in the comments and I was talking about time value of money because, I mean, you know how I love to be in the comments.
We love that about you.
Right. For folks who don't know me, I mean, hey, you will learn this about me. I love being in the comments, especially when things are just very, very just like, this is inaccurate. I need to communicate. Now, this video was not necessarily inaccurate or anything, but I just wanted to share because I knew that there are going to be a lot of women and femme presenting folks and like queer and trans people who would be in the comments. And I'm like, I want to share this. So I noted, like, it's important for all of us to understand time value of money, and that a dollar you have in your wallet today is not worth the same tomorrow or the next week or next month or next year or 10 years from now. And that when we hold money in our bank account that's not invested, it loses value. So us thinking, I'm just going to hold on to $200,000 in a general savings account, and then 10 years from now, I'm going to buy something that's, $200,000. That's not what's going to happen. 10 years from now, more than likely, you're going to want to buy something with the $200,000 that you have in 2025 money, but you're not going to be able to afford it because $200,000 will be inflated by that time at 10 years from now. So when I put that in as a comment, there were hundreds of people who responded to this, who were just like, wait, like, I'd like to know more about this, or like, what does this mean? And like, where should I put my money then? And for me, I thought, okay, this is like, even though this was just me being on the internet in my pajamas one day on a Saturday in between episodes of Downton Abbey, now I'm recognizing I actually just tested the market, and the market said, we need this information and we need this knowledge. And yes, we also want to engage in conversations around ethics. And in the meantime, we want to know that we have a future, and that our future is financially backed by ourselves in the present. So our future selves can thank, our past selves once we're 10 years from now, 20 years from now. There's something that we can rely on that goes beyond having to sell our labor as an exchange for wealth or access to wealth or money.
Well, and I think that the American dream story is, hey, this is, first of all, everyone's got equal access. Okay, so we know that's right?
Yeah.
And I want to make a distinction there and pull out some nuance, because I don't like when that sentiment of like, yes, there's systemic inequality gets to the point of, and therefore, you can't do it if you're X, Y, or Z. Like, that's not the case. That is not the case.
It's very nihilistic.
It's harder for some people than others. That is absolutely true. And
yeah, for sure,
everybody can do it. And it's just a matter of like, what's the access to knowledge or resources? Like, how do we close that gap? And like, how do you, and then you can put your own grit and your own determination into it. You can do it. So everybody can do it. And there are systemic inequalities, and that gap is getting wider. It's getting wider right now. I saw, and this is like some of the best political messaging I've heard in a long time. I saw the other day, Trump's war on the poor. And I was like, yeah, Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like what, so
Mm-hmm.
not only is there like horrific downward pressure on the poor, and as we're at the time of recording, people's SNAP benefits were getting canceled in the last couple of
Yeah.
weeks. I mean, literally like letting people starve, like some old world barbaric.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also downward pressure this year on the entrepreneurial class, which is
Yeah.
generally an upper middle class. Everybody except, the tech titans now is getting squeezed. And, I can't help but think about like, what is their aim? Do they want everybody to die except like these top 100 dudes, or like, and then what, and they're going to go to
Mm-hmm.
Mars and start a new society? Like, what are we trying to do here?
Yeah.
And where does the people power come in? Because historically, and I'm not trying to incite violence or anything like that, so don't hear me wrong here, but historically, when things get to a tipping point of inequality, you see revolution. You see the people say, "Oh, that, we're not doing this. We're going to fight for our survival, and we're going to overthrow until things can get a little more, there can be a little more equity in the
Mm-hmm.
situation." So opening that whole can of worms for you. Uh, where do we go
Absolutely.
from here? Because it's really felt this year like I wanted more people to do more. Like, who's doing
Mm-hmm.
something? What are we doing? And
Yeah,
it
for
feels like a
sure.
lot is going on that I felt like people would have already stopped. People, leaders, whoever would have come together and stopped. And it's just nobody's stopping it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think part of it is because of incrementalism that we've been gliding little by little to the center. And so I
Mhm.
think because of that, a lot of people are like, oh, this is my political leaning or this is my political leaning. And I'm like, okay, I think actually a lot of you all actually are centrist.
Mhm.
And because of that, there's not a push to get out of the pattern and to break the pattern. All change is loss. That's what when I say to my clients all the time that we work with at MMG EARTH, that all change is loss. So even when it's a negative sort of an event or a negative pattern that's harming people or hurting people, even just the thought of still changing it and experiencing something that people are not used to is scary.
Mhm.
And so something I would say to entrepreneurs and to the entrepreneurship class is like, one of our biggest strengths is adaptability because we know that there's no way that we can run a business in any country, but especially not in the United States,
Mhm.
because things have been so volatile and historically our country is an overspender, irregardless of like the partisanship there. Of course, with Democrats spending slightly less, but like always spending over the budget is like something that we do. So I think that there's something about us recognizing that 70% of businesses typically survive year two, 40% survive year five, 30% survive year 10,
Mhm.
25% survive year 15. So you
Mhm.
ask yourself, what year am I in? And know that, okay, my business is surviving, my business is continuing to run. Doesn't matter if ever at any time you had to pull back and do less, your business is running. So
Mhm.
what does it mean for you to be adaptable? And then also how does that align with like your politics and your values and the ways in which you're supporting community? Because like you said, Michelle, when you said like, hey, what is it, you all just want like the top 1% to only be are the folks surviving? And we know, thanks to the study of like human behavior and like philosophy and art and culture and economics, that there is no society without the majority.
Mhm.
There will be no one to do the jobs, right? To actually ensure that the things that people want are done. There's no one who then is going to be out and making sure that people are fed or that, the production chains are running in the ways in which they need to run because all human beings on earth are interconnected. So for me, I think it's very much like it's no end game. I think it's literally how can we amass as much wealth as possible while saying that, empathy is a distraction. And the good news is that even though there are folks that like that who exist, which is not good, that there is a wider majority of people who are like, actually, we don't agree with that. And we do think that you can be successful financially and you can care about people and you can make decisions that are good for you while also making decisions that are really good for the collective. And you don't have to choose between the two. And if anything, actually considering the collective is actually what makes our economy stronger. It's what creates jobs and what creates economic opportunity. So I do think that the nuance of that is something that's important for folks to communicate and for us not to allow ourselves to be, conditioned by the mythologies of like, it's just going to be two folks or it's going to be the top 10% or it's like, no, that doesn't exist without the majority.
Well, and the majority still has the people power of, being the majority inherently.
Yeah.
We do have to talk about, how does that potentially shift with the advent of AI, with robots? I do feel like there are folks at the top who think, oh yeah, no, the rest of these people are completely unnecessary because we did need them for labor. We did need them to run everything. And now maybe we're not going to. And so,
Yeah.
screw all of them. They're just takers or what, I don't know. I'm making shit up. I'm putting thoughts in people's head. But this is my like kind of dystopian reality. Is like, is there this class of billionaires that really doesn't care about anyone else existing? I have resisted that line of thinking for so long. I've been on the internet keyboard warrioring against that, with folks saying that in the last 10 years and me being like, no, these people are providing lots of jobs. Yeah, Bezos is a billionaire, but what do you want him to do? Shut down Amazon? Like, how many jobs would go away if he did that? And how much of the economy would and I was on, kind of that centrist capitalist side of the argument. And now things have gotten so extreme that I'm going like, wait a second. Wait a second. Are they going to dispose of everybody once they don't need labor anymore? Is that really the plan?
I mean, I did research on this in collaboration with an organization called Project Include, and we produced a report called AI at Work as part of like the research arm of MMG EARTH. And something that we noted in talking to some leading AI scholars and like entrepreneurs within the AI space, or like who've worked in the technological space for a long time, is that these billionaires and these billion-dollar companies are really struggling to figure out how to operationalize AI. That a lot of it is fluff marketing, and that they are trying very, 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 very hard right now to figure out how do we actually make this profitable. But so far, they've been unable to figure that out, which is why a number of folks, refer to it as an AI bubble, while there are others who are like, no, it is not a bubble. But when you think about, millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars being lost in a single day to investments in AI. And then we also think about the ways in which we've seen some recent companies go bust because they just have not been able to figure out how to operationalize it in a way that's profitable. We're not where some of these men that exist today would want us to be, which is good news for us. But it also means that to your point, it's going to mean that we have to mobilize around actually protecting our data privacy and our rights. Because when it comes to AI, that's the business model. It's having access to our most personal data and then using that basically to turn it into ads so that we spend more money. But it's not some of the things that I think some of the other things that we've heard, especially specifically when I say AI, I'm speaking specifically also about generative AI tools. Because AI has been around a long, long time. But generative AI tools, that there's a struggle to kind of identify, okay, we have all this access to data, but now what do we do with it, and how do we monetize it?
Well, yeah, and and to your point, okay, we're being squeezed for every cent that we have, right? It's like, oh, we're just going to extract everything we can from everybody. Like, one of the trends that I see that really concerns me is there's a trend away from being able to own anything. And like, we know that for a long time in terms of the housing market, it's a lot harder to buy a house, buy a car. But at this point, like anything, it's like my cell phone, right? I used to go and buy a cell phone when I wanted a new cell phone. Now, what do? I basically like rent it from AT&T until it's time for me to get a new cell phone. Minor thing, but that's happening with everything. It's like everything is turning into the subscription economy.
It's so true.
And that's concentrating wealth more and more in the hands of very few people.
It really is. No, it's so true. Absolutely. I mean, it's a major, major, major issue that if we don't have elected officials that actually take it seriously, along with people who back them and who get out of the center, then it's only going to worsen. And as we know, the new poor class are going to be people who we would have previously thought were like middle class, which has already started happening right now with folks living paycheck to paycheck, where folks are one paycheck away from houselessness, from homelessness. And I would say that, even when we think about the transition from feudalism to capitalism, that also was like one of the preliminary steps in removing people from access to ownership and putting people in a position where the ways in which the only thing that they really own is their labor. And technically they don't own that because they're constantly leasing that out to be able to make a living. Which is why I think that having the education is so critical. Because I think if you don't know know these things or have access to this information, then it's so easy to be on social media and to think that all of this is normal and okay. And it's like, no, actually what we deserve is something better. We deserve to be able to live lives of ease, and we deserve to be able to make money that doesn't even, require us to be millionaires even, but just enough to be able to survive and then to be able to thrive, take care of our families, and live lives that are happy on our own terms, with access to healthcare, with access to like community support, with access to quality food and to quality shelter.
Well, yeah, I've heard the trend of what's happening described as techno-feudalism. Uh,
Hmm.
and you see these two possible realities, right? And one is this utopian reality. So this is, I'm doing a little K shape if you can't see me. If you're listening, not watching, I'm doing a little K shape with my hands. There's this utopian reality in which AI and the robots come and they make it so that nobody really has to work and we all just get to like have lives of leisure and spend time with our families and do all these wonderful things that everybody wants, like basically all be on permanent sabbatical and find joy and make art and whatever, right? And then there's this other dystopian reality where we all get kind of trapped in the matrix or the metaverse or what have you, and there's a level of comfort that traps us in that because that's the only kind of relief from the stress of what's actually going on around us, and all the resources are then concentrated at the top and the rest of us are just it reminds me of that Black Mirror episode. I don't know, do you watch Black Mirror?
Of course I do.
Where,
Absolutely.
do you remember a few years back where the people would like spend all their time on the bicycles, like the
Yes.
exercise bike, and then they would get like little tokens where they could buy food or they could buy,
Hmm.
Black Mirror is so creepy because it's
I
always like
know.
2 years ahead of what's
And too
happening. I think about
accurate.
that
Yeah,
episode
for
all
sure.
the time, and it's like we're gonna get to this point where everyone's just riding their little bike for their little tokens so they can, eat and live to ride the bike again tomorrow.
Yeah, no, totally. Absolutely. No, I completely agree. And I think that's why the interventionist piece is so critical and so necessary. And I think also why breaking allegiance to just making money for the sake of making money, and understanding that, making money for the sake of making money is one thing, but I think also making money for the sake of making money at the cost of like quality of life, and other people being able to actually have access to the resources that they need to survive and thrive in this society is just like wrong. So I do think having more access to communities, to organizing communities, to mobilization that focuses on intervening in that, and also to elected officials who are brave enough and courageous enough to say, like, yes, I know that this is $1 billion company, and also um, the people deserve to be able to have human rights. They deserve to be able to have access to what they need to thrive in this society because they are who create the economy and they are the reason why our economy and our society actually exist.
Yeah, well, absolutely. It's like Amazon is obviously important to the US economy, and the folks who work in the warehouse should be able to have bathroom breaks and, just
Yeah.
humane treatment. I mean, I have friends that work in corporate at Amazon, and it's a grind at the corporate level as well, right?
Yeah.
Um, we have gotten a little bit dark here, and this is my fault. This is an inspiring, uplifting show. And so give us some hope. Like, where do we go from here? How do we organize? Where do we go from here to make sure that everybody is taken care of and thriving in our society?
Well, I think maybe to end on a high note, I'll just say two words. Zoran Mamdani.
Mm.
And I say those two words because, for folks who potentially are like, okay, well, I don't think that it's possible for any elected official to enter with progressive politic that says people should actually be able to stay in their communities that they've been born in. They should actually be able to have access to housing that's accessible and that is affordable. And for some folks, they might consider that to be revolutionary. And I think for others, they would consider that to be just like basic politics and basic like human decency. So I think that that has given a number of folks a glimmer of hope of like what's possible of like, hey, if we could do this in New York, then we could do this in other areas. We've already done this in Chicago, then we can do this in other cities or potentially in areas where folks don't think that it's possible for people to care more deeply about progressive politics. But what the research tells us, especially economically, is that a number of folks, the majority actually agree with the progressive politic. It's a matter of how it's marketed and how it's communicated, but saying everyone should have access to work and quality food and a house to live in is not something that the majority is saying they don't agree with. So I do
Mhm.
think it's a matter of how do our elected officials as leaders and then also the leaders of progressive organizations come together to mobilize in a different way and to actually break ties with what is considered status quo in order to do what is best for the majority and for the collective.
Well, and if I can take just a couple more minutes with you and ask you on the spot to give us a quick econ slash and or finance lesson, right? One of the issues with the messaging is that, and it's very, very effective on the right, is people are being told, if these people get housing and food, then it takes out of your pocket, it takes away from you. That's not how this works, right?
No.
We're not working with a finite pie where if
No.
I get healthcare, then it takes out of your pocket or you don't
Yeah.
get something. And I think that's where there's an education gap So for anyone listening who isn't following that concept, will you expand on that a little bit for us?
Absolutely. So when we think about the economy specifically, we know that the more that inequality and injustice exists, so for example, homelessness, parents not having access to quality healthcare, people not having access to quality education, then the more that it creates a weight that is carried by the society collectively or by the country collectively. And typically it's a financial weight, but it also is social, right? So we know that in an economy that's not being cared very well by its elected officials, when there's an economic recession, the more that people experience the frustrations and the overwhelm that come with an economic recession, they don't have access to work or jobs, the more that violence increases, the more that people engage with like whatever is considered to be criminality according to like the federal government or their state governments. And that just puts more pressure onto folks that live within a community or live within a neighborhood to be able to have to protect themselves or also protect their property, et cetera, et cetera. So when we think about when we think about our history economically as the United States of America, we do better when we actually have a plan to support people socially. And that doesn't mean that, okay, well, we're saying some people should work hard and other people should not work hard. It means that how labor is distributed within a country is just like fundamental, foundational, what needs to be planned for within every single country and government, because there is no country in the world where everyone works. We have folks that have disabilities who are not able to work. We have young parents or people who've just given birth who are not able to work. We have children who are not able to work. And so if we say, let's just turn our backs on everyone who is not able to work, then basically what we're saying is let's turn our back on our country as a whole, because no country that does not have, especially a capitalist country like the United States, that doesn't have some level of socialism, some level of supports when people are entering into, right, well below poverty levels, not able to have access to food. All it does is create more liabilities for the country as a whole. It damages people's lives. It damages communities generationally. And it gets us further and further away from true innovation and like success, like not just financially, but also socially too. So I would say that it's not a zero sum in the way of like, oh, if this person has access to healthcare, then that means that I no longer have access to healthcare. We know that Affordable Care Act subsidies are expiring at the end of this year. You know what that means? It doesn't mean, oh, well, I'm just going to be fine if I can afford my healthcare and everyone else who can't afford it won't have healthcare. It's no. That means millions of people then won't be able to afford healthcare, which means that healthcare companies are going to be increasing the cost of healthcare and everyone else who can't afford it. Right. So to say, oh, well, I'm going to be in a better position because somebody else doesn't have access to that, the opposite is true. The more that people do not have access to what they need to survive in this country, the more that it's going to be a strain on everybody else. And honestly, I think that it should be, because we are interconnected. There's no one here who could say, you know, listening to this podcast, or no one in our country who could say, okay, well, I'm completely self-made and everything that I have is because of me and me alone. It's like, well, have you ever heard of a food production chain? And you understand that there are folks that, you know, work in fields to pick our food so that we can have food that's delivered to our homes, and people who drive the trucks to the grocery stores, and folks who actually stock the shelves, and then folks who, you know, help us during checkout, help us to find, you know, the yogurt when we can't find it for some reason. Like, we're all interconnected and we need each other to actually be living well. Or what happens is, each of us who thinks that we're in a really, really great place financially, that are not billionaires, we're just inched out more and more and more to the place where then we're the person who's asking, how am I going to pay for healthcare? Where is my next paycheck going to come from? How am I going to, you know, pay the rent this month? So we really need people to be in an equitable position financially, or we're looking at a society that just cannot sustain us in the ways that we need to be sustained to be well and to actually live lives of ease, which I hope is not too long of a explanation, Michelle.
I think it's so important to talk about this stuff, and just to highlight the fact that it is so possible to do well for yourself individually with a collective mindset. And you're such a beautiful, shining example of that, Bunny. If folks want to follow along with you, if they want to join ECON Club, if they want to learn how to do better individually for doing better in the collective, like, where can they find you online? Where can they follow you?
So you can follow me on Instagram at McKensie Mack, McKensiemack, one word. TikTok the same. And then if you go to Patreon, that's where you can become a subscriber to Econ Club. That's patreon.com/Econ Club. I just added a tier specifically for entrepreneurs. It's called Capital Class Internet Empire, which I think ties in really nicely to a lot of the conversation that we had today, Michelle.
Lovely.
So you can learn more about my work there. You can also learn more about booking time with me on Calendly, which is calendly.com/join Econ Club. If you're an entrepreneur who wants to do more work around finances and money and the ways in which you think about resources and price out your products and your services.
Beautiful. Bunny McKensie Mack, thank you so much for being on the show with us. We definitely have to have you back because there's so much more we could talk about. But for today, I'll just say we really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And for everybody watching and listening, we'll see you next time.
Bye.